Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So we're reading from Srimad Bhagawatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 10, Text 27, and I'll finish up the chapter up to text 30. So we'll just recite the first text 27 together. Vairactas, Traya, Vigaite, Vairactas, Traya, Vate, Deva, Sargash, Cha, Satama, Deva Sargas, Cha Satama, Vaikrikas. Thank you. Two. Ya. Prokta. Vaikaratakas tu ya prokta. Kumaras. Tubyatmaka. Kumaras tubayatmaka. Vairactas Traya Evate, Deva Sargas Chasatama, Vaikarikas Tuya Prokta, Kumaras Tubyatmaka, Vairakatas Traya Evate, Deva Sargas Chasatama, Vaikrikas Tuya Prokta, Kumars Tubyo Atmaka. Others?
Vaikritasraya evaite, Deva Sargastra Saptama, Vaikarikastu Yatrokta, Kamarastu Hayatmaka,
Okay, word for word. Vairacta, creations of Brahma, Traya, three kinds, Eva, certainly, Iti, all these, Deva Sarga, appearance of the demigods, Cha, also, Satama, O good Vidura, Vaikarika, creation of demigods by nature. Two, but, ya, which, proktaha, described before, Kumaraha, the four Kumaras, two, but, Ubhyat Atmaka, Virakta and Parakta. Translation. O good Vidura, these last three creations, and the creation of the demigods, the 10th creation, are Virakta creations, which are different from the previously described Prakrita, natural creations. The appearance of the Kumars is both. Please repeat. O good Vidura,
O good Vidura,
these last three creations, and the creations of demigods, the 10th creation, are Vairakta creations, which are different from the previously described Prakta, natural creations. The appearance of the Kumars is both. Okay. Text 28 and 29. Devasarga Shichas Vido, Vipado Pitaro Surha, Gandharva Postrasa Siddha, Yaksha Lakshami Charanaha, Bhutta Preta Prechascha, Vidyaraha Kinoradaya, Dashte Viduраkyataha, Sargaste Vishvashikruta. The creations of demigods is of 8 varieties. 1, the demigods. 2, the forefathers. 3, the suras or demons. 4, the Gandharvas or apsaras or angels. 5, the yakshas and rakshasas. 6, the siddhas, charanas, and vidyaharas. 7, the bhutas, pretas, and prichas. And 8, the supreme beings, celestial singers, etc. All are created by Brahma, the creator of the universe. Purport. As explained in the 2nd canto of Srimad Bhagawatam, the siddhas are inhabitants of Siddhaloka, where the residents travel in space without vehicles. At their mere will, they can pass from one planet to another without difficulty. Therefore, in the upper planets, inhabitants are far superior to inhabitants of the planet in all matters of art, culture, science, since they possess brains superior to those human beings. The spirits and the jinn mentioned in the connection are also counted among the demigods, because they are all able to perform uncommon functions not possible for men. Text 30. Attaparam pravidyam yami mam samana vantari cha evam raja palushrishta kalpa dish atmabhuharir surjati mopisam kalpa atma vaitmanam atmanaha. Now I shall describe the descendants of Manus, the creator Brahma, the incarnation of the passions and modes of the persons of Godhead, creates the universal affairs with unfailing desires in every millennium by the force of the Lord's energy. Purport. The cosmic manifestation is an example of one of many energies, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The creator and the created are both emanations of the same supreme truth, as stated in the beginning of Bhagavatam, Janma Yat Asharyata. Thus ends the Bhagavatam course, 3rd canto, 10th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Divisions of Creation. Om Migyan Timirandishya Nanjana Shlokaya Chakshu Nimam Itasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vistam Shapitam Nirabhutale Swayamukara Mayam Dhanti Swaparantikam Vande Am Shri Guru Shri Parkamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavams Cha Shri Rupam Sakritam Sarvaganatam Tam Tam Sajivam Sadhuvetam Sadhutam Pujan Sitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahavanamita Shri Shapitam Cha Hey Krishna Kruna Sindhu Dinam Banda Jugapate Gopi Shah Gopi Kanta Radha Kantanam Siddhe Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radha Vinadmeshwari Vishwan Sudidevi Haradhanami Harapare Vansha Kalpachundischa Kripasindhu Cha Itanam Padiva Vaishnava Namaha. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming to Srimad Bhagawatam class. When we hear the words of the pure devotee, we all make advancement in purification, no matter who reads it. Is there anyone here for the first time? Oh, very nice. What is your name?
Joe.
Joe.
Yes.
Nice to meet you, Joe. Thank you for coming. We're reading Srimad Bhagawatam, which is a thing with some philosophy and psychology. So if you have any questions after the class, we have time for questions, or if you want to ask later on after class, you can do so. But thank you for coming. We have breakfast afterwards, so
Thank you.
stick around. So, herein, this is describing the creative energies of the Lord. And we find this even in the Bible, right? In the Old Testament. It talks about how the world was created. And so we find in many religious traditions, they talk about creation of the world and how it comes about. So this is the commonality we find in many religious traditions. And we can understand that this Srimad Bhagavatam actually goes beyond the idea of religion. Religion means to try to understand God, right? And sometimes when you mention the word religion, it's almost a four-letter word. And people have negative ideas about what religion, what it means. But it means just actually to search for God in this context. So we can understand that all living entities are trying to find satisfaction. They're trying to find happiness. But you understand this material world, everyone's looking for happiness in so many types of ways, but everyone becomes frustrated. So whatever tradition one can come to, the idea is that one is turning to God because he understands that he's limited in his understanding. And for some people, they become very, as we use the term, fried out by the material nature. Right? Many people become fried out from this material nature because the material nature is asking so much. The living entity is trying to find enjoyment. He's trying to find enjoyment through a false notion that he can enjoy with his body, that he can enjoy everything that he sees. And so, as they say, the idea, and at least in America, they have this idea, it's called the American dream. If I can just come to America and become successful materially speaking, then everything will be perfect. I'll have everything that I need. So we see so many people strive for this. They try to do well in school, get a good college education so you get a good job and a good family. But yet, we find that so many people are even frustrated, even though they are engaged in these activities. So the question arises, what brings real happiness? And that's to understand the nature of the self. The self is what's described in Vedic literature as Satchit Ananda Vigraha. So this means eternity. We all possess eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So by nature, we're all blissful. We're all ultimately, as we say, Krishna consciousness or God conscious. But due to illusion, we become covered over. We become covered over. And we can all have these realizations, even for someone on this spiritual path. He runs into so many obstacles on his way, whether it be mentally, physically, monetarily. There's always going to be some particular challenge for the spiritual aspirant. It's not that one comes to spiritual life and there's no more problems, right? Sometimes that might be the idea for some people. They may think that, let me just forget about these difficulties in the material world and I'll just come to live in an ashram, or I'll live in a synagogue, or I'll engage in some activity so I don't have to worry about the problems of the material world. But whether one tries to escape it, the problems come no matter what, because this world is a place of difficulty. There's no doubt about it. You find difficulty in any realm. So one can try to hide or escape the difficulties of the material world, whether one is trying to live in an ashram or live outside an ashram and thinks that all my difficulties will be fine if I just engage in if I have a certain amount of money or a certain bank account or a certain wife or husband. One can try to escape that. But inevitably the difficulties of this world face us. So we have to be very attentive to that and be very conscious of that, even for the spiritual aspirant, right? we understand that there's been great personalities that they came very close to going back to the spiritual world. We understand that this is the material world, and ultimately the goal for within Krishna consciousness, for the spiritual aspirant, that he's trying to go back home, back to God. Ultimately, that where he becomes a servant, where he actually is actually serving God. And servant is actually a very high title. Sometimes in Kali Yuga, or what's known as this materialistic age, that people think being a servant is a negative thing. That I should be the leader, or I should be the control, the dominator of everything I possess. And people will worship me and like me. And people don't necessarily say that, right? They don't go on saying that I'm so great and wonderful, but if you kind of press them, or you put them in a certain position, ultimately that kind of comes out by nature. And as Martin Luther King, a great civil rights personality, which is very interesting about Martin Luther King, that a lot of his philosophy for bringing up civil rights was actually came from India. He actually read many great teachings from Gandhi and civil disobedience. And he got many of these ideas from India in many ways. But he goes on to say that everyone can be a servant because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to make your subject or verb degree. To serve, you only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. So, we understand that being a servant is of the highest degree. This is what one can actually be. And that is that ultimately, it's not a matter of whether we'll be a servant or not. It's a matter of who we're going to serve and how we're going to serve. So even if one says that I don't want to be a servant, and one goes wants to enjoy within the material energy, you're ultimately going to serve, whether you like it or not. And we can see this on an everyday basis, right? Sometimes we can see people walking their dogs, right, in different places, and attached to the little leash, little doggy bags, right? And then as soon as the dog passes, the person has to clean it up. And I was just thinking, when I would see this, because I would travel different parts around the United States and sometimes around the world, and people were really into doing this. And I was thinking, can't imagine doing that, right? But it comes down to is that it's not no matter whether you're going to serve or not, it's who you're going to serve. And so ultimately, we should try to serve the greatest personality. The greatest personality can actually give us the greatest reward. And that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or Krishna. Krishna means all attractive. It's another name for God. And you can choose, there's many names for God. You can choose which one you like. But ultimately, the idea is that we should try to serve. And even for the spiritual aspirant that is on the path of Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti meaning devotion to God, Yoga means to link, so it means to link with connection to God, that there can be challenges along the ways. There will be so many obstacles, and there will be so many diversions. You know, sometimes you may, as my small experience of being in temples for some period of time in different parts around the United States and different parts around the world, is that ultimately, a lot of times we can be very enthused when things are going very nicely. There's some great Kirtan, or there's great prasadam, there's great things happening, great lectures and speakers. But sometimes it's more of a challenge, actually, to be Krishna conscious when we have obstacles put in the way. That will we remain in Krishna consciousness just because of the things that we like? Or will we stay no matter what the difficulty may be? So we have to be prepared for these difficulties. And the main difficulty is the mind, right? It's stated in Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is one of our main books that we read. It's basically ABCs of spiritual life. But Bhagavad Gita says is that the mind can be one's best friend or worst enemy. So one must learn to control the mind by the mantra meditation of the Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. And within this mantra, the basic translation is, "O Krishna, O energy Krishna, help me to please serve you." Right? So it's actually you're asking for service. I remember particularly when I was in Tallahassee, Florida, when I was serving the temple there, and I remember there were times where I went through great difficulty of having to get up at 5:30 in the morning, and I would start cooking from 5:30, and basically go to the university. I'd come back at 3, and then I would chant my rounds. So, but I was having a lot of difficulty there. But it was interesting. There was one boy there that was from Gainesville, and he used to say, well, you should appreciate all these difficulties because that's what you're asking for. When you're chanting Hare Krishna, you're asking to engage in Krishna service. So what are you doing? You're asking for something, Krishna's giving it to you, and you don't like that? What's your problem? So he said that to me, and I thought, well, I really can answer anything to that because basically that's what I'm doing. I'm chanting and I'm asking for service. So we should always appreciate the ability to have service. And when you're sitting in a temple, you have such a great fortune, such a great opportunity to engage in so many types of services. And so as we can understand, there's unlimited possibilities of service that we can do at the temple. There's never a level of greatness. We can always improve that greatness to whatever it may be, to whether it may be keeping the temple immaculately clean, whether it be to go out and distribute literatures of this Krishna consciousness. In the early days, many devotees told me that many of the devotees would go on Harinam for what was it like, something like 8 or 10 hours a day, something like that. That was the beginning of really the Krishna consciousness of it. Was the Harinam, where they'd go out for 8 to 10 hours a day, staying out very late and all these things. But there's unlimited possibilities for that. Introducing Krishna consciousness to other people, cultivating people in Krishna consciousness, attracting them to Krishna consciousness. There's so many people actually that are out there, they're unsatisfied, that are actually looking for Krishna. And it's just a matter of giving them a pamphlet or inviting them to the temple. And they're just waiting. So it's just a matter of us to actually really go out there and introduce this to people out there. So we should also understand that this mind that gives us so many troubles is actually our only obstacle. There is no real obstacle but the mind. And the great thing about understanding that is that we can actually do something about that. We can actually control our mind and senses by the instructions given by the previous acharyas, by following the regular principles, by chanting 16 rounds, by attending modularity, by getting advice from senior devotees. This can actually help us very much so. That's why even in Bhagavad Gita it states that one should actually take instruction from a spiritual master, or one should take instruction from a guru. That can help the person on the path of bhakti. Because a person can get actually a lot out of reading, and there's no doubt one can make advancement, but to actually understand, to actually apply Bhagavad Gita, to apply spiritual life, it's good to have someone that is realized and this knowledge can direct you on that path. So that's very vital that we have that. And we also have to be able to take constructive criticism, right? Oftentimes when criticism comes about, we ultimately want to defend ourselves. Like, no, you can't say this about me. But if you have someone, even if it's not, say, even constructive criticism, it may be criticism, we can look at it in 2 ways. We can look at it as that, okay, is there some validity to what this person is saying? Is there any factual things that they're actually saying? And if that's so, then maybe I should change, or maybe I should apply it. If not, why worry about it? Because it doesn't apply to me. So certainly we should be ready at all times. And actually, this is the duty of the spiritual master. Oftentimes the spiritual master is the disciple's best friend, but in one sense, the spiritual master isn't necessarily his job title isn't necessarily to be friends with the disciple. Because sometimes when you have people that are your friends who are kind of like on an equal level, and you should sort of, your friends aren't necessarily going to tell you what you're doing wrong, or because that's not what friends do, they just kind of support you, whatever you kind of choose to do. And sometimes that's a whole other thing that, maybe that advice you're getting from friends aren't necessarily the best thing. But in general, friends are just people that you kind of hang out with. Whereas you understand is that the spiritual master on a very high level. And that we see the spiritual masters as stated that the spiritual is not God, but he's to be treated as God. So in one sense, we have to have kind of awe and respect for the spiritual master. And that person is a spiritual master who's on a very high level of understanding of Krishna consciousness. And so sometimes the duty of the spiritual master is to chastise the disciple. And that is actually meant in a loving kind of way to correct the disciple that he may be doing. Oftentimes people emphasize the loving kindness of Srila Prabhupada, which was inherent in his nature. But also what was inherent is that he could discriminate between things that he saw that were incorrect and correct. And he would sometimes be very heavy with his disciples in order to get them to understand. Right? Sometimes if you're very nice and friendly and lovey-dovey all the time, people don't understand the immediacy of the situation. So sometimes a very strict external heaviness has to be applied. But again, what's important to note within this is that Srila Prabhupada himself was very loving. So even when Prabhupada was chastising people very heavily, people understood that it was in a loving way, even if it was very heavy.
Could I say something?
You may say something.
Because when he would chastise, he didn't hold his anger. He would give a chastisement and then he would be very sweet. So Shruta tells about it, how he was very gentle.
Yeah, and that's also very interesting too, is that Prabhupada would be very heavy, but he wasn't attached to being heavy. He just knew it. We have to kind of be very careful with that within ourselves, because we would be attached to a particular anger and let you express it in the wrong way to another person, and that can be very unproductive. So the idea is that we're not attached to anger, but we can use anger in the service of Krishna consciousness, and it has to be in a loving spirit as well. But sometimes in any professional company or business, that sometimes hard decisions have to be made. And if they're not made, then there's improper direction. And sometimes to get the emphasis of producing something, one has to be very strict. But the main point is that we should be very strict with ourselves, following the rules or regulations very strictly, but very lenient with others. Meaning that we should try to encourage others on the spiritual path. But ourselves, in order to encourage anyone, we have to be very strict followers ourselves. Very strict in our sadhana, within our chanting, within our reading on a daily basis, and associating with devotees. Understanding the difference, even associating with particular devotees. There are certain devotees that have been in Krishna consciousness longer. We try to serve. Those are in an intermediate stage that we try to develop friendships with. And those that are just coming to Krishna consciousness, we try to help them advance in spiritual life. So we have to understand this. And also, we have to also understand that there's all kinds of devotees out there. I remember when I was a new devotee, I went to the San Francisco Rath Yatra. And I remember being there for the Rath Yatra. It was one of my first ones. And I remember being on that, and anyone's ever been there, they'll know there's this place called Hippie Hill, where all the hippies and different people that play music in that area. And I remember looking over the hill and I could see different hippies playing music and I could see the whole festival laid out. And then to my right, I saw certain spiritual practitioners who were engaging in some illicit activity. And I was just like amazed when I saw that. I couldn't believe it. And I came to understand that there's all kinds of devotees and that many are at different levels, and that we shouldn't unnecessarily criticize them, but we have to understand that I think this question kind of came up one time when we were having a meeting with my spiritual master, Ramnath Swami, and someone asked the question. He was talking about the second generation, and he brought up the question that, how is it that, there are so many people born into Krishna consciousness, but they don't take it that seriously, or they don't follow very strictly. And he gave a really great answer that I thought was very nice. And then he said that many devotees that are born into devotee families, externally, they might be very strict, or they don't follow very strictly, but they have great love for Kirtan, and they love Krishna very much, and no matter what happens, they'll always kind of be around. Whereas maybe sometimes people that convert to Krishna consciousness, that they may be around for some time, and even practice very strictly, but they may leave altogether. So in the long haul, he was kind of making the point that even though they might be following so strictly, that they have a deep love and attachment for Krishna, and it's only a matter of time till they'll get it right. And the other kind of question came about in the sense that, how do you deal with, like, sometimes you may see Prabhupada disciples or devotees who've been around for a long time, and what they do doesn't necessarily is always very appropriate. And he said that we should always offer respect to everybody, no matter what, but we show respect from a distance. Because we know we are who we associate with, and so even associating with particular devotees, we can understand that we can pick up that particular consciousness from that devotee. So the idea is that we should always try to associate with advanced devotees that on the spiritual path to help us in our own spiritual path. So here we should understand that the ultimate goal is to come back to Godhead, and this can be done simply by following the process. And then we should always check our minds, because the minds are always, the very unique, interesting thing about human beings in general, they always have this ability to be in sometimes illusion about certain things, not even recognize it. So therefore, it's always good to ask a senior devotee, to ask, well, where am I at? Like, what do you think about this? Is to actually talk about certain things that you may be struggling with and aren't sure about, or certain things you've heard from maybe other devotees that philosophically aren't quite right. How do we understand this? Because it's always good to get instruction from people that know more than us, because we can learn from that, and then we can see for sure whether what we're thinking about or what we think is right, or is it some kind of delusion that we're putting ourselves in. And it's very hard for the conditioned soul to understand it. Am I being too attached to this particular situation, or am I rightfully attached? Is this very Krishna conscious, or is it not Krishna conscious? Because the idea is that we understand the idea of Yukta Vairagya, that everything can be used in Krishna service. And ultimately, that's how we do it. We may have certain attachments to the material world, but we try to engage them in Krishna service to purify our consciousness, and this is good. But we can be kind of tricked into that kind of thinking that, okay, I'll use this in Krishna service. I'll buy like a Ferrari for Krishna, and I'll drive around the Ferrari, or I'll enjoy, I'll make lots of money, and I'll do this to show people that you can be materially successful, or I'll go make a movie, or become this famous person, or make lots of money for Krishna. We have to be very careful. Some devotees can do that very well, and others may not be able to do so well. So the main point is that we have this propensity for self-delusion, and that we should always keep ourselves in check by talking to the spiritual master or other senior advanced devotees that can help us on the path. Because along the path, as anyone that's been around for a long time knows, that there's so many challenges and there's so many obstacles on that path. And if we listen to our mind, particularly for new devotees, if we listen to our mind and all its dictations, as Krishna consciousness we may think it is, we should at the very least, try to have that in check with someone that is a senior advanced devotee, just to see what they think. And they could say, well, yeah, that's a great idea, that's not a great idea. But the point is that we always go to an authority in our position in spiritual life. So if there are any questions or comments?
I think it was Kishore Babaji's disappearance day today, or appearance day.
Or Kishore Babaji's
Yes.
disappearance?
Yeah.
It's his disappearance.
I think disappearance.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't bring the literature on that. Do you have anything you want to say on that, Maharaj? Or? Okay,
I did not know that.
Navadwip?
Actually, there's a wonderful pastime about his passing with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, because he was known as a great soul, and many people stepped forward to try to claim him as their spiritual master, though he only had one disciple, and that was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Because they wanted to take advantage of having his samadhi, where that would attract pilgrims, that would attract money. And so they tried to come forward and take his body. And even because he had said at one time, he said, "Oh, when I die, just drag my body through the streets." And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta stepped up and stopped this. And then he said, anyone who has not had illicit connections with a woman in the last day, you may come up and make a claim. And then nobody stepped forward and said, so in the last 2 days, in the last 3 days, nobody could step up. He was a very great personality who would go to the stool fields. He would hide from people so that he could really meditate on his japa. So he was also a great acharya in an example of how important it is to put our consciousness into our japa during japa time. And even though it was interesting too that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had encouraged Srila Bhaktisiddhanta to take initiation from him, because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was such an erudite scholar, so intelligent, known for this. Whereas Srila Gaurkishora, he actually came from a Vaishya background, and he was not particularly well educated. But his bhakti was so elevated and so pure, and it just demonstrated how these material qualifications don't really matter.
It's very interesting too, correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't that he even asked for initiation from Gaurkishora Das Babaji, but he actually rejected it many times.
He did. He didn't want to take it. He said, I'll ask Mahaprabhu, and then he would hide from him. And one time he was hiding on the doorstep of a prostitute. And he started laughing. I fooled Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. I fooled you. He was completely
wasn't also that he finally given an initiation when Bhaktisiddhanta said that if you will not initiate me, then I'll just commit suicide.
Yes, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta then came to him and said, if you don't take me, I have no choice but to just drown myself in the Ganges. Because his father impressed upon him the importance of taking initiation from a bona fide spiritual master. So, yeah.
It's very nice pastime, thank you. Any other question?
I read that we are both this body. What does mean we are both this body? I think we are human beings.
What that means is, that's the basic premise of Bhagavad Gita, is that we're not the body, but that we're the soul. And the soul comes into a particular body, whether it be a human form or animal form, according to one's karma. And it's described that the spirit soul, what gives life to the body, as compared to the driver and the vehicle. Right? There's a lot of people drive Mercedes, Cadillacs, Datsuns, whatever it may be. But the person doesn't say that they're the car, they say they're the driver of that car. So certainly the soul is the driver of the body. But due to this identification, that the person is thinking that the body, and because of this, there's so many problems in society. People are thinking that I'm black, people are thinking I'm white, female, male, European. These are all misunderstandings. That ultimately that the individual, every individual is a soul by nature. And if everyone understands that they're soul by nature, one won't have a problem within society with different people of different backgrounds. But basically, the whole world is struggling with this, right? So many people have issues with race or gender, all these particular things. But even with animals, right? People are thinking that I can slaughter as many animals as I want to feed myself because they have no soul. There's even certain religious traditions that may say that they have no soul. They're basically an inanimate object, and so we can enjoy them as much as we like. What's the problem? But they understand that when you see an animal, it's not an inanimate object. We understand that it cares for its young, that it cries in pain, that it has feelings and emotions to a very minute degree. So when one actually understands he's actually the soul, and he's connected to the larger part, which is God, he sees the soul within all living beings. And ultimately, there's ultimately world peace, just based on that notion. And then we understand that we're the soul, we act basically on the soul, and understanding what is most beneficial for us. Because as much as you try to enjoy the material body, the more you actually suffer. And we see this, whether it's through drugs or relationships or different types of, even money, having certain amounts of money, that the person never becomes fully satisfied because he's not really touching the heart of the matter, who's understanding the nature of the soul. So yes, and even we can understand this on a theoretical level, that we're not the body but the soul, but to actually realize it is a whole other thing. So even for the spiritual practitioner, he's daily having to deal with the material nature, what we call Maya, and that is ultimately we're making choices on the day-to-day, whether I'm going to choose Maya or I'm going to choose the spiritual energy. And so once we really realize it, not just know it, they can make our lives perfect. But it was a very nice question, because it's the basis of body being, it's the basis of spiritual understanding that we're not the body but the soul. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. Srimad Bhagawatam.
Good.
Jai.